Welcome to Natural Collisions, brought to you by Co.act Detroit. Conversations about the challenges and opportunities in the nonprofit sector, highlighting the voices in nonprofit work in Detroit and Southeast Michigan, and beyond. I'm your host, Charnay Sanders, Program Manager at Co.act Detroit. In today's Natural Collisions conversation, we are continuing our discussions about workplace well-being. Today, we ask the question, what if nurturing an environment that centered wellness and rest for nonprofit leaders and staff wasn't a lofty luxury only afforded to a few, but a priority for all in the nonprofit sector? Our guests today are uniquely positioned to answer questions on disrupting the status quo by prioritizing rest and well-being in a sector where passionate change makers are often burnt out. Our guests this month are Jody Nishioka.
I am Jody Nishioka, and I am the co-executive director of the BIPOC Executive Directors Coalition in Washington State here in the U.S. And we have two pillars of work: wellness for BIPOC leaders and doing community work, and advocating for more resources for BIPOC communities.
And Kate Oliver.
I'm Kate Oliver. I'm a freelancer, so I used to be head of learning at places like the Horniman Museum and London Zoo, and now I deliver learning projects, I study psychotherapy, and I run the Radical Rest Network in the UK, which is all about getting workers in this sector to rest for once.
As we begin, let's learn more about our guests' personal journeys and the details that brought them into their current roles and missions.
I'm an executive director here in Washington State. I've been working in the nonprofit sector for over 30 years, working mostly with refugee immigrant communities and other BIPOC communities. And in the last 12 years or 13 years, I've been doing a lot of capacity building with nonprofits, particularly BIPOC-led nonprofits. And in that capacity, during COVID, we were hearing, I work with other organizations a lot, building up other nonprofits. And I had been hearing a lot from executive directors about how stressed they were during when COVID first started. I mean, in terms of our organizations were needed to do more. Their communities really needed a lot of support, but they weren't getting access to the resources that were coming down, most of the grassroots BIPOC-led organizations. And my colleagues at other capacity building orgs were hearing the same thing, and we were talking, and we said, let's call a meeting of BIPOC leaders and see what's going on. This was back in 2020, in the summer of 2020, which is like in the heat of COVID. And so we called an emergency meeting of BIPOC leaders across the state of Washington with a week's notice. And we thought maybe 30 or 50 people would show up. 150 people showed up, and 50 more said, I can't make it, but I'm really interested in this. And so the coalition was born. We didn't know what it was going to turn into, so we just held space and said, what's going on with folks, and listened to folks. And then we kind of broke out in small groups and said, what do you need? What can we do together that can support each other? And two things really rose to the top. I mean, there were a bunch of things, but two things rose to the top, and that was wellness. They were saying, we're getting sick. We're so overworked. We were overworked before COVID, and now we are just so stressed. We have family, elders we're worried about, of course, during COVID. We have kids that we're homeschooling because of COVID, and our communities are really in need. And we're like working 24/7, and we don't know how we're going to sustain this. And so wellness rose to the top. And then the other thing was, of course, we need more money to do this work. We're not getting access to the federal money that's coming down. We're already under-resourced. We all know BIPOC orgs are less resourced than mainstream orgs. And so those are the two things that rose. And so that's how we started. At the time, the four of us who founded the group or who called the meeting were all executive directors of our own organizations, doing this as part of our work, sort of volunteer, and also working really hard, doing two things now. But that's how we started. And then after about a year of just holding space and doing wellness, bringing in wellness folks of color to help our coalition and doing some advocacy work, we realized this is a thing. So we started to do more research on what's going on in the community and other places, what's most needed. And we started doing sabbaticals and other types of deep rest work.
Love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jody. And Kate, please feel free to chime in. Also interested in your journey as well.
Sure. A really similar start to what you said, actually, Jody, that it came from a very kind of grassroots need. So I was on a leadership program called Space for Change here, in which we got a few hours a month to together look at a change we thought we needed to see in the sector. And as we kind of all gathered together as a group and you'd go around and kind of check in on how everybody was doing, it was just a constant, I'm sure you found this in networks of your own, it's constantly exhausted, overstretched, overwhelmed, hitting deadlines. And myself and a group of my cohort just felt that we had to address rest as an issue before you could change anything else in the sector. It was the first thing that we needed to do. So we started off with a little bit of research. We put out a survey and we got 67 responses in about 10 days. So it was clearly, like you said, Jody, a live topic in the sector, with really interesting results, fascinating results, and deeply heartbreaking results as well. It was clearly really impacting people, like you said, their health, their families, their lives outside of work, and the quality of their work as well. People saying they can't do creative thinking, they can't do strategic thinking, they've lost motivation, and it's becoming a vicious circle that you're constantly going into the next project and not actually getting any satisfaction from the project you've just done. So at the end of the course, we were meant to do a 20-minute presentation on our work, and instead of that we made everyone rest for 20 minutes. We had a room full of cultural leaders and made everyone rest for 20 minutes, and when we announced that, there was a gasp in the room of the impossibility of that idea. So it was a really powerful intervention for the people there, and brought up a lot of other issues about kind of discomfort with rest that I'm sure we'll talk about. And since then, I started the Radical Rest Network off the back of it because people kept asking about this. And it was originally just a mailing list. And that was 12 months ago. And there's now 220 people on it. And we now meet up online, like you guys, Jody. And it's a space for supporting each other, for learning about best practice, for learning about what people are doing that works. And most importantly, for just supporting each other to prioritize rest and to be allowed to do that and supported in doing that.
It's wonderful.
The discussion so far highlights the connections between accessibility and rest and the levels of resources available to various groups. But let's dig a little deeper by providing some simple context. Recognizing that rest can vary greatly depending on circumstances and personal preferences, I asked the question, what does rest actually look like for each of our guests? And how do we define and experience rest as individuals?
It's really different for everyone, and it's really different for everyone every day and even every hour. So right now, I think rest would be for me probably movement, because I've been looking at a screen for a while, so I'd probably want to go for a walk. Nature's a big thing for me, so out in nature. This morning, I definitely wouldn't have said that. I wouldn't have said lying down. I was very physically tired. It's often solitude or kind of a lack of sensory input. I want to be somewhere quiet, whereas other times you might want a social. So it's super different at different times. And when we talk about rest and when we do rest interventions where we get people collectively resting, we talk about listening to yourself and what you need right now in this moment, because it really does massively vary to people. And I think that's one of the things that we're missing for leaders in the sector, is that space to be able to even hear what rest is for you, like right now, let alone to take it.
Yeah, it's really interesting, my journey on rest for myself. I took a sabbatical in 2021. And 3 months is the first time I've ever gone on a sabbatical. I was supposed to take it in 2020 and had to delay it because of COVID. And I was also in preparing to rest, I overworked even more. And so by the time my sabbatical came, I was getting hives every day. And as soon as I took this sabbatical and I was not working anymore, like in that first week, I got the flu. And I was just thinking, this sucks, because I had these grand ideas of what my rest was going to be, which was going to be like travel and, just hang out with my family. And I was stuck in bed sick with hives and with the flu. And I was just like, for a minute, I was really feeling sorry for myself. I was like, I get 3 months once in my life and I'm sick. And then I realized this is what my body's telling me. My body's telling me at this moment, and Kate, to your point of it varies from time to time. But at the beginning of my sabbatical, I just needed to sleep and nap and be alone, hang out at home to get better, even to just like not be sick anymore. And it took me 4 to 6 weeks, actually. 4 weeks, I was feeling pretty good, but I was still getting a little bit of the hives. By 6 weeks, it was completely gone, and I was really well. And it really was like phases. At the beginning, I was buckled down and just nursing myself to get better. And then it was like, I got to take this slow. I have to just like try not to do too much. And it was hard for me. I mean, I would find myself at home with nothing to do. Nobody's home. Computer's off. I don't have to work on the weekends. And I'm just like, I think I have to clean up here. And what else do I need to do? And it's like, no, you can just sit and lounge. And I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't feel right. I got to go do something. So it's different. And it's something that you have to practice. I do set aside time. And this is partly my doing, but also I set aside time every morning. I go for a walk. I start with a little bit of yoga. I do a little bit of meditation, and that whole process is about 2 hours and a half. And so I sort of start my day with like alone time and doing that kind of practice. And that's sort of rest, but not really. It's still doing, but at least it's nurturing for me. So it's not really a good example of rest, but it's my way of resting at this stage of my life.
That counts as rest. That's you listening to what you need, right? You don't need to. First thing in the morning, you don't need to lie down and crash out like you did when you at the start of your sabbatical. You need to move it out.
Yeah, that's true.
Sabbaticals for nonprofit leaders have significant benefits. They support individuals' well-being, foster personal and professional growth, enhance creativity and innovation, improve organizational health and sustainability, and reconnect leaders with their mission and values. Each of our guests understand the significance of sabbaticals and shifting workplace culture to truly value rest. So I was curious to know more about BIPOC ED Coalition of Washington State's sabbatical program. Specifically, what are the benefits, especially for nonprofit leaders who often give so much of themselves to their work? What does it look like to implement a sabbatical strategy that creates space for restoration, rejuvenation, and healing before re-engaging back into meaningful work?
Yeah, so we give out 3-month sabbaticals, $60,000 to cover costs of the sabbatical. And what we found, we just gave out our second round. So our first round, we gave out 23-month sabbaticals, and 12 one-month sabbaticals. And then that was 2 years ago. So it's like a 1.5-year process from for them to apply, get it, and then give them a full year or more, 1 year and 3 months, 1.25 years to actually take their sabbatical. And what we found is we're just finishing our full evaluation and we're getting the results. And I talked to all of the grantees and we get them together, and it's just incredible when they come back. I mean, I'm just thinking about one grantee right now in particular who I'm in space with her often. She's a BIPOC leader of a very active nonprofit. And every time we're in a meeting, she's ready for the fight. You can just feel this energy. She's fighting for every dollar. She's fighting for her community constantly. And there's this just like aura of, every time I've been with her, she's just intense and passionate. And I saw her in person at a meeting 2 weeks after her sabbatical. This was just about a month ago. And she walked in and she was like, her aura, her energy was so different. And it was like, whoa, Ginger, what's going on with you? You're just like, whoo, like, no, it's like she had a facelift. No wrinkles on her face, just calm. And she's like, I just got back from my sabbatical and it was life-changing. And she just said, I'm so grateful. I've, got in touch with myself. She did so much she traveled and she did a bunch of stuff with family. And that's what we hear from folks. It's like they get a lot of rest, a lot of time, space to be back in touch with themselves. And Kate, you talked about it, about how they're constantly, they lose themselves, they lose their touch with their creativity, and they're just doing the next task, the next task. And they don't have time to reflect or to have that sort of generative, creative, what brought them to the work, these great ideas. And what we find, a lot of what they say, besides doing fun things and besides even the rest, is getting in touch with themselves. And they need the space of rest, that quiet space, that time for reflection to be able to have that. And that to me is really, really profound. I mean, that's what the result of rest is to be able to be in touch with yourself and your own creative forces and be back to yourself and not just doing for everyone else. So just to lift up kind of the impact of it, I can get into a lot of other things about the sabbatical, how you do it and all the nuts and bolts, but I'll leave it there unless we want to go there later.
I'm fascinated by your program, Jodie, and I'd love to keep hearing more about it today. It blows my mind, like you being able to give these kind of 1 month and 3 month opportunities, because I'm scrapping for 20 minutes for people here, and it's difficult for lots of very valid and real reasons. So like you say, having a month, having 3 months that's properly supported and resourced to be able to take time off is clearly going to be life-changing and game-changing and career-changing for people as well. In terms of our research, so we asked people about the barriers to rest, because it isn't easy, and that's why we're here and why me and Jodie have roles to play. The big things for people in our survey were about workload, obviously, about a lack of staff, because again we were coming off the back of the pandemic where we'd had massive layoffs and things hadn't recovered yet, but a big one was all about expectations, and that's not just organizational expectations. So we're operating in a context of increased need. The communities we're working with have got increased need, and the organizations we're working with are scrapping for funding, like you said, Jodie. And also there's a great shift towards prioritizing community engagement work and learning work and education work in our organizations, which is fantastic, but also is meaning we're further centered in the work that our organizations are doing, which is increasing responsibility and pressure as well. So there's expectations from the organization, but also people were reporting the expectations from themselves. So feeling a lot of guilt for prioritizing their home life over work. And feeling a sector pressure as well, because these are organizations and roles we get into because we're passionate about them and because we care about them, and we're usually personally invested. So there's a lot of expectations building up. But we also asked people about what works, which was really useful for people to know. So the big thing that doesn't work was workplace wellness initiatives. So they came off very poorly in it. Yoga at lunchtime was not getting any praise at all. The move to flexible working was kind of a 50-50. So lots of people really like it, really helps them rest. Lots of people, it blurs the lines in a really difficult and dangerous way. But the really big things that came out of the work, lots of personal things. So like you said, Jodie, things you do for yourself, you go for a walk, you take some time, people mentioning mindfulness and exercise, things like that. Things in your organization like boundaries. So people all taking a break at the same time, taking lunch at the same time. There was a lovely quote from somebody who said, everyone's gone at 5:30, so I feel like an idiot if I'm still there at 5:45 answering emails, because it's just a cultural norm in the organization for people to be gone. So those were the most kind of powerful things, is boundaries set by yourself and boundaries set by your organization. And we also asked people what radical rest they'd like to see. So what kind of big change? And amongst the creative answers we got things like nap rooms in your office, computers that shut down after 8 hours, whether you're finished or not, which I like, a mattress loan scheme, so you can borrow money to buy a proper good mattress, affordable childcare, which is a radical dream in this country at the moment. But the ones that really came out as most popular are the ones that actually lots of organizations are doing, which is a 4-day week on full-time pay, which is, the research is hilariously backing that up now, and loads of organizations are shifting to it very effectively. And also organizational closure periods, which happened in a few different arts organizations over here shortly after the pandemic, when there was that kind of acknowledging of a collective exhaustion in the workforce. So now some organizations will shut for a couple of weeks in August, a month if they're really into it. We often get a break in the UK between kind of late December and New Year's. So those things actually made a difference. And from this, we circled this idea that rest, to be effective, needs to be mandatory and collective. And it was interesting when you were talking about your own sabbatical, Jodie, of when you can have some time off, whether it's a sabbatical or it's you're taking time out or you're taking your leave, there's a sense that your inbox is still filling and that there's still things going on without you. And I know your sabbatical program brilliantly puts resources in to try and mitigate that. But the idea that 4-day weeks and closure periods are mandatory and collective, everyone's off, everything stops, and that's when people actually got those benefits of rest. And so it circled this idea of permission to rest and where you're getting that permission from, because you can give yourself permission to rest, like you said, Jodie, blocking out a period of time. Lots of people do that, or kind of putting in their diary kind of a secret meeting that's about rest. But organisationally as well, ones that were actually giving permission for rest, not just saying everyone go home on Friday early, please, but actually making breaks mandatory, having lunches together, doing shutdowns. Those were the things that were actually effective. From what we were looking at. I wonder how that resonates with your research, Jodie. I know you've done loads on this.
A lot of things to unpack there. You mentioned so many things that I could resonate with, and that I was experiencing in our work here. First, I wanted to just kind of unpack this idea of the guilt and not wanting to not being able to rest. What we found with our sabbaticals, especially in this last round, we just gave out 21 more 33-month sabbaticals. And a lot of folks were very excited. Of course, everyone was very excited, but there's a lot of fear. Like, I don't know how to do it. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I'll be able to let go. I even heard, as far as in our first cohort, if I don't show up, people might, there's a consequence to me not working. People in my community could die. It was like that. And this idea of this grind culture that we have, certainly I'm sure you have in the UK and the here, and how I think it really goes back in our history to slavery. This idea that we're valued for our output. We're valued for how much we do and what we accomplish, and that rest is earned. And that we have to change that narrative that rest is essential. It's not earned or deserved. Everybody needs rest, just like you need food and water. So there's a lot there. And for BIPOC folks, there's even more, because there's, at least I can speak from my experience and what I've heard from people in our coalition, this feeling like there's all these stereotypes that we have to also, this internalized depression of, if I don't perform, if I'm not competent, if I make a mistake, then they're going to just say I'm lazy, or they're going to ignore me, or whatever it is, for whatever racial stereotypes, the racial oppression on top of the grind culture that we have for everybody out there. And so, one I wanted to bring up, so that leads me to another thing that I wanted to share, which is there's I don't know if you've heard of the Mindshare Partners study, but it's a study about mental health at work. And they've done 3 years, 2019, 2021, and 2023. I can send you the link after. But one of the things they found is that marginalized communities are disproportionately impacted by mental health, poor mental health in the workplace. But everybody suffers from it. And what you said about the wellness perks is not what they wanted. They wanted like a culture of wellness. They wanted a systemic shift in the sector or in their office even. So it's not like, oh, I get to have an app, And when you say 4-day work week, that's actually a systemic answer. It's not just a or time off, like the whole office closure. To me, that's not a perk, a self-wellness perk, a gym membership. This is like the system. We're changing our whole system. We're going to take, and that's what people said they needed. So that really resonated, Kate, and that came out in this study. They studied 1,500 people and a fair amount of BIPOC folks so they could get that data. I recommend it. Recommend looking at that study. And the 4-day work week, I think we have a 4-day work week. We're feeling like at the BIPOC ED Coalition, we only have 4 staff, but that we have to really live what we're advocating for. And that's actually been, we'll get into the advocacy work, but doing that kind of practice ourselves is actually speaking to the funders. And 4-day work week, what was in the news this past week was a whole county here. It's a small county. They don't have that many workers, but still a county, a government entity went to a 4-day work week. And they're just finished the first year and got their evaluation, and they saw many, many benefits. They're still working out kinks around services, essential services. So that's the hard part for folks. So those were some of the things I wanted. Oh, and when you talked about mandatory, one of the things we said about our sabbatical, when they signed the grant agreement, we need the board to sign. We need to say this person is going to be off. And the whole purpose of our sabbatical is not doing research or doing other work that you don't have time to do. It's about rest and restoration, and that everybody involved, if you're getting this grant, that's what this purpose is. If you can't do that, then this is the wrong sabbatical for you. And it's hard. I mean, life happens. Emergencies happen, and we found that there were definitely a group of EDs who went on sabbatical or senior leaders who did get called back or felt compelled to answer the call. And it was an emergency and they needed to do it. But several people also said, they closed it off and there was no emergency and they were able to take off. And so I do think that having that kind of systemic mandatory time where everybody's off, or a sabbatical where it's like, and the other final thing I want to say about the sabbatical and something you said, Kate, was the preparation for a sabbatical is really huge. So you have to, what we found is you have to prepare. You need to feel comfortable that everything's going to be taken care of. And your staff and your board need to feel comfortable that you figured out who's going to be doing what and that you're not going to be needed. Because it's already planned for. So in case of this type of emergency, go to this person. They're prepared. They know this is not their responsibility. And so that preparation is really huge. And then coming back also, because what we don't want, we want to have a shift for them, not just like 3 months of their lives. We want them to come back and be able to continue to practice this rest that they've learned. And so coming back, this is one thing that we found in our first round. We didn't give enough support for planning on that back end. We did a lot of support on the front end. But when they came back, they realized, oh my gosh. So we've built in more coaching time and more deliberate thinking before they go on sabbatical about what's going to happen when they come back. So things like coming back slow, blocking your calendar for a month, 2 to 4 weeks, no external meetings. And so I can just use that time to come back to like catch up on my email, talk to staff. Maybe I come back and I don't do 40 hours right at the front. I do 20 hours for a couple of weeks and I ease back in. So anyway, those are some of the things that some of the learnings we've heard too around mandatory stuff and preparation. around rest.
Yeah, it's crazy how many hoops we have to jump through to get that sense of permission, isn't it, to rest, that you're literally like getting the board to sign it off and setting up all of these avenues for people, and like you say, making yourself sick for a couple of weeks on the way into it to make sure everything you're holding and everything you're responsible for is not going to drop while you're gone, to get that permission. And like you say, the elephant in the room here is like, we're living in a capitalist and oppressive society, which is the reason we're all feeling like this bigger picture. But then also obviously working in nonprofits, that's even more emphasized. And like you say, for BIPOC leaders, what we call global majority, is even more emphasized because of that intergenerational issues. And increased expectations and different expectations for BIPOC leaders as well. So yeah, it's crazy that we need all of this to feel that we can rest. And it's not surprising that it feels so difficult and that it feels so uncomfortable. And I know, all through my work with Radical Rest so far, and Shana, you've seen some of the times we've done it. People find it really hard. We'll just do like a 5-minute intervention, and people find it so hard and scary to do. And I think it's really important to name that when we're talking about these things, because people must think with your sabbaticals, Jodie, that it's a treat for the person and it's necessary. You know what I mean? It's required for them as a human being. And it's really important to acknowledge, I think, for everybody that this feels hard because it's hard, because of the culture that we're in and the fact that, communities who are marginalized by society, it's even harder to, because they've got different expectations. It's hard because of personal messages that we've got as individuals about not feeling good enough or about feeling extremely responsible for people around us, and that's especially in our sector. So there's lots of really... And it can be really uncomfortable because it involves acknowledging that an organization is unconsciously or consciously taking advantage of its workers as well, and of this passion that we bring. So there's really tough stuff to sit with while we're doing this work. And I think it's really important we acknowledge those things to be able to get that sense of permission that we need it. I wonder what are the impacts that people tell you after the sabbaticals, Jodie, like organizationally and personally?
I mean, their relationship with work has changed. They're more in touch with themselves, so they're more creative. They're more protective now of not losing that space, that place, that connection with themselves. We also hear a lot of shifts within the organization. In the first round, where we gave out 23 months, five of them, so what's that? 20% of them found that put in their own sabbatical policy. So that it wouldn't be just the executive director, but for the whole organization, they put in a policy. So we're seeing systemic change. And, the personal stuff, I mean, I talked to several people in this last round. They had folks who have died recently. One woman, I called and told her to tell her she got the grant. And, people break down in tears. They're just like, no one's ever done something like this for me. I've never felt cared for before, like this. But this one woman was literally speechless. I had to say to her, "Are you still there?" And she's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. My son died 2 weeks ago, and I took 3 days off. I have not taken time to grieve. I mean, I'm going to break." I started to get teary thinking about it, and she was in tears. She could barely speak, and she's like, she goes, "Honestly, I kind of forgot I applied for this because, they applied once before." Her son had cancer, a long haul, and she'd been taking care of him, adult son. And she's like, "I have not had the time to grieve." And it was so moving. And since then, I've spoken to her since. She's wasn't as emotional the second time I talked to her. And she's like, "I'm going to go and spend time with my family to grieve, and I'm going to do some other things by myself, blah, blah, blah." But, it can be it's been really, really powerful. Again, just the rest that people need. They come back and just feel more energized. I had one who said, "I'm ready to work. Like, I'm feeling really energized." And I was like, "Whoa, that's awesome." And the organizations, like I said, are shifting because they entrust their leaders, other people in the organization to do the work, and they prepare them. We give them so much lead time. We've asked them to take the lead time to do the planning. They bring their staff along. And what we found there is, look, oftentimes the ED and the staff were like, I'm good you taking on this additional piece of work. I don't need to give it back. And the ED is like, great, one less thing off my plate. So there's this leadership development and this idea of sharing responsibility. It doesn't all hold, I don't have to hold it all on one person or two people's shoulders. And so there's that piece. There's a shift around sharing responsibilities and being able to let go of stuff. We also found, on the other hand, that there are times when a lot of times the staff were like, oh my God, I didn't appreciate all that you've been doing. Now that you've been gone and we've all had to step up and cover for you, we had no idea that this is what you've been doing. And we also heard staff going, I never want to be an ED. Like, I give it back to you. I did it. I don't want this job. So it really ranged, but it was a lot of, that's a lot of capacity building within the organization, because they're doing a lot of learning about themselves, about each other, about how the work flows and what changes can happen so that it can be a healthier way of doing the work. And a realization that our jobs descriptions are often way too big for what we are paying them for. So yeah, lots of learning, a lot within organizations and a lot of personal learning, and people coming back just rejuvenated, And I will say, a lot of these folks that we've given sabbaticals to have been in the work for 30 years. So they're actually ready to transition. And it's also a way for them to start their sabbatical planning, because they have to prepare for the sabbatical ahead of time. We require a sabbatical plan where they have to figure out who's going to be doing what. And it's sort of the beginning of succession planning, and they're putting their toe in the water like, oh, this is what it might be like. Maybe I can retire. Maybe I can transition, where they just thought they just couldn't. What would happen if they leave? A lot of these are founding EDs. And so that can also happen. Beginning to think about succession planning. That's one of the things we found, is succession planning has gone up as well, which most organizations know they're supposed to do and never do. And then they're not prepared, So yeah.
There is a transformational shift happening at this moment within organizations, where team members can grow and gain personal and professional skill development, while also creating more spaciousness for rest, joy, and discovery. The Radical Rest Network brings together people from various organizations to provide resources to advocate for rest, not just for executive directors, but for entire teams. As a result, I had to ask, how does the Radical Rest Network offer resources, tactics, and shared experiences to emphasize the importance of prioritizing radical rest in the sector?
It's a space for people to be able to do that for each other, to be able to provide experiences and what's worked and the reality of resting, and to support each other in that. And yeah, Jodie, like you say, those big changes in organizations are absolutely inspirational after sabbaticals. And you find the same with 4-day weeks. 96%, I think, of the organizations who trialed it globally carried on with it, because it has got such huge effects, and effects they can tick, like productivity, as well as making human beings happier and well, just burned down the list. So yeah, in the network, it's really important. We try and get different speakers along to talk about something that's worked for rest in theirs, because things, for example, like 4-day week can feel like this completely impossible dream that would never work in my organization. And then you hear someone talk it through, and that it's not easy. You know what I mean? You've got to work out, okay, so what does this mean for part-timers? What does this mean for service users on a Friday? What are we going to shift the week? What does this mean for weekends? What does this mean for annual leave? There's a lot of stuff to sort through. So it's really useful to hear from people who it's worked for. And it's also just like this, we don't talk about it. We talk about how stressed we are. And especially amongst leaders of nonprofits and charities, we talk about how pushed we are, and we talk about how exhausted we are. And for the people in the Radical Rest Network, someone just said they've just started making the conscious decision to talk about their rest instead of their stress to their team, and it's made a real shift in that culture, in their team culture, because when they come in, they're saying, oh, Jodie, I had this great walk before work. I went down by this place. I had a really good time, rather than like, oh, I was working till late last night. I'm so stressed out. So naming it, I think, it is making a really big difference. Sharing those practical resources about what people can do, because there's a whole scale of things you can do. And, 4-day week might not work for your organization. And the scale goes right up to, dismantling oppression and capitalism, and right down to speak about your rest a little bit more. And all of the things that we can do between that are valid. So I think the most important thing to advocate for, and that we're trying to do with the Radical Rest Network, is give everyone those tools, that permission and that support to make the change they can right now, and to see more radical change going on at the same time, so that they can feel that is possible for them as well. So everything from making massive change in your organisation, which we do have members doing, down to just trying to change the culture of your team, or just starting to block out time, or even just attending meetings like we do kind of every 6 weeks. And some people say that, the quick 5-minute rest, collective rest we do together in those, is the last 5 minutes rest they had was 6 weeks ago when we did it. So just starting to break the mold, and just starting to open the door on that for people, and have that collective support from people in the same situation with the same pressures as them, where, like you said, Jodie, it does sometimes feel like life or death, and it does sometimes feel like you're responsible for an entire community, an entire city. So we need to have people who are in that context as well, that can say, I'm doing it.
I love that you find them where they are, because I do think that that's one of the things that we heard too. When we were doing the 3 month, we went to 3 months and 1 month. We tried the 1 month, and we thought, okay, it's expensive. It's an expensive program. And so we raised the money. Our priority was for the 3 months, because research shows you need at least 3 months. But we went back to the coalition and said, what do you guys think? And they're like, 3 months is really important. But there's a lot of us who can't take 3 months, either because our organization just doesn't have the capacity. Maybe it's a one person and all volunteer, or we're all young, or whatever. We just can't do it. And so they said 1 month is good, but even 2 weeks, giving us 2 weeks, and everybody gets vacation, but giving them a sabbatical, like you said, Kate, around being mandatory. So if they get this grant, they have to take it within 18 months, or it's whatever, 14 months or whatever it is. And then they get a little bit of money too. And that's an incentive, because a part of our grants is like the individual gets a one-time bonus to use however they want. And that's really a carrot for folks, I think. Anyway, they, so that mandatory piece again, but finding them where they are, we're trying to say you need 3 months because it takes 1 month to just decompress. And people are like, but I can't I can't do it. So we're like, okay, let's go. Let's listen to them. And 1 month, and now we have 2 weeks. And we're also doing 3-day retreats, restorative retreats. So we're trying to also find where they are and practice. I think you're right, naming it and practicing it with them. So similar to you, whenever we have a coalition meeting, we start with a 5-minute centering thing. And I know there are some people who go roll their eyes. At least I used to do that way back when. I go, okay, we got to do this. And then I'm always grateful. I'm like, oh yeah, I did need to get centered, because my mind was like running from the last meeting and where I'm going to go next. So finding them where they are and being that support. I think it sounds like what you guys are doing, just talking about it. That's really important. And in terms of advocacy, Shani, if you don't mind me moving into one of the things we are trying to do is really advocate to funders, because we're all working in the sector and we can't do it without money. A 4-day work week, like it has to be okay with the funders at some level. And so we're trying to advocate to funders like, no, it's not about you. It's about us. And they need this. And we're finding at this moment in time, post the racial reckoning during COVID, although there's a little less emphasis on equity than there was in 2020 and 2021, that people are listening to what we need. And funders have been supportive. We have been able to raise money for sabbaticals. It is kind of the shiny new thing, and we're starting to see a little drop off, but we're just trying to really keep coming back with our studies and our evaluations to say what the impact is. But I think going to funders and telling them you need to fund general operating so they can use it for what they want. But if you're a capacity building funder, like if you're a program funder, then give a little bit extra for the staff, not just for the program for the community, but for the staff to use for what they need. It's wellness or it's sabbaticals or it's breaks or whatever it is. So that's one thing that we're doing a lot of, is talking about it with philanthropy, to try and talk about the success of this program and the impact, so that we can continue to do it, but that they also fund organizations to have their own sabbatical policies and can build it into their own budgets. So that's an area of advocacy that we're working on.
It's inspiring to hear how Kate and Jody are doing meaningful work through their organizations and initiatives around prioritizing radical rest and wellness in the nonprofit sector and beyond. It highlights a crucial culture shift in our sector, reimagining how we work, show up, and integrate rest into achieving our missions without sacrificing our well-being. As we wind down, I ask for final remarks on the need for rest and how listeners can invite space for rest within their own lives, communities, and organizations.
Rest is Resistance by a manifesto by Tricia Hersey. It's really great, and makes that argument that it is an act that we are reclaiming our right to rest, and that is essential. It's not something that you earn and is deserved. So that would be my final.
Yeah, exactly that. Tricia Hersey, the Nat Bishop, you should go and look up immediately. If anyone listening is in the UK, Gayleen Gold over here is not a bishop, but she does amazing work for global majority leaders in our sector as well. But I think, echoing Jodie's takeaway, it's about a bigger culture change in our society. But I think to follow up that, do what you can, build on what you've got right now. So talk about it. I think if you can't think of it, if everything else seems impossible that we talked about today, even like taking a lunch break next week feels impossible, then just talk about it. Start by talking about it, and it will really build. People really want to talk about this. I don't know if you found, Jodie, the moment I mentioned what I'm working on at the moment, everybody's like, oh, really? Okay. Desperately wants to get into it. So yeah, get connected about it. Everyone needs this.
Thank you to both of our guests. Jody Nishioka, co-founder and co-executive director at BIPOC ED Coalition of Washington State. Learn more at BIPOCEdCoalitionWA.org. And Kate Oliver, joining us from London, England. She is the co-founder of the Radical Rest Network. To learn more about the network, read Kate's article on radical rest for the cultural sector, linked in the description. This has been the Natural Collisions podcast from Co.act Detroit. Remember, the word co-act itself means to work together, because we know we cannot have transformational impact if we only work alone. To learn more about our work, visit coactdetroit.org. Please subscribe to Natural Collisions on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We will be back with more conversations soon. Thank you for listening.